Is it the VA's position that the VA will not comply with an act of Congress based on another agency's interpretation of the law?
So the VA has always works to comply with all laws. We complied with the Brady Handgun Act when it was in fact the law.
So again, is the VA's position, because based on the statement they could not comply with the Restoration Act, the Veterans Second Amendment Restoration Act, is it your position that you will not comply with an act of law passed by Congress?
Yes, sir. I guess based off of what you have in testimony, yes, sir.
That you would not comply?
Yes, sir.
Did you hear that? GOA helped write a bill to restore veterans' Second Amendment rights, and that bureaucrat just told Congress he would ignore it, even if it passed into law. But that's not all. So let's dive into this madness that just took place at the House Veteran Affairs Committee here. Hi, I'm Ben Sanderson, and you're watching Minuteman Moment. But before we get into the video, I'd like to take a second to talk to you about GOA's first convention, Goals. The Gun Owners Advocacy and Leadership Summit will be held in Knoxville, Tennessee this August 17th and 18th. Come meet some of your favorite 2A creators like Brandon Herrera, Guns and Gadgets, and Phil Riboli of Law and Ammo. There will be fun for the whole family as well, so be sure to register now at gunowners.org/goals to learn more. Okay, now back to the video. We've done several videos in the past about the veteran fiduciary rule, but for those of you who don't know about this rule, that GOA recently helped Congress overturn, it said that if a veteran who is using a fiduciary to manage their finances, the VA would report them to NICS as a prohibited person, meaning they'd lose their right to buy a firearm. So we won this battle by defunding the process of VA forwarding names to NICS. No longer are veterans going to be treated as second-class citizens by the Biden administration. Our estimates indicate that the change will protect about 20,000 veterans per year from unconstitutionally being disarmed by unelected bureaucrats. Needless to say, the anti-gunners in Congress were not happy about it. Only hours after Joe Biden signed the GOA-backed provision into law, 138 House Democrats penned a letter telling VA to bypass the law and ignore Congress. That'll become a common theme here in just a moment. These anti-gun Democrats even went so far to say that VA bureaucrats should use red flag laws to have veterans' guns confiscated if they exhibited concerning behaviors. Now, because that was part of an appropriations bill, that means this year it's up for debate again. So, we worked with the House Veterans Affairs Committee to make sure that Biden also would be prohibited from disarming veterans in 2025. And that passed the House of Representatives in early June. Democrats were so mad, they even lied on the floor saying stuff like, VA will not take your guns.
There is, once again, an amendment to this bill that will make it easier for the most vulnerable veterans to access guns and more difficult for VA to help them. The inclusion of this rider spreads the lie that if a veteran seeks mental health care at VA, their guns will be taken away. This could not be further from the truth. VA will not take your guns.
Oh yeah? Then why does the NICS database say there are over 250,000 people in the system labeled mentally defective? Yeah, that's the offensive term these tyrants are using when talking about the veterans they want to disarm.
In assigning a fiduciary, VA must also report the beneficiary to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, the NICS system, as under the law, they are adjudicated as mentally defective. This reporting prevents the beneficiary under federal law from purchasing a firearm.
Honestly, Debbie Wasserman Schultz ought to listen to Matt Rosendale.
Do you think that identifying veterans that request a fiduciary as mentally incompetent builds confidence in them coming to the VA and receiving health care there? When you identify them as mentally incompetent?
I do believe, because that mental incompetency decision is based
You do believe that makes them more inclined to come to VA? Okay,
No, I'm sorry.
I don't believe that it does, but if you believe that it does.
I do not believe that it sways them in any way, because the decision is based off of benefit, not off medical treatment.
I just think it's a very degrading terminology. That's what I think. And I think if we went around the table here and started talking to the veterans and said, do you feel comfortable with the Veterans Administration identifying you as mentally incompetent, that you would probably find that most of the veterans find that offensive as well.
So anyway, these threats from 138 House Democrats prompted us to push for even more protections for veterans. First, bureaucrats need to be prohibited from using gun confiscation laws. Second, Even though Biden can't disarm any more veterans, we still need Congress to restore the lost gun rights of 250,000 veterans who have already been disarmed previously. That's why Representative Eli Crane decided to introduce 2 new pieces of legislation, the Veterans Second Amendment Restoration Act and the Safeguarding Veterans Second Amendment Rights Act. And oh boy, did the gun-grabbing bureaucrats over at the VA have major issues with that. These smooth brains really went to the committee and said that taking veterans' guns away is in the best interest of the veterans. But it gets even crazier. At the markup I was talking about earlier, a VA bureaucrat said he would not comply with the Veterans Second Amendment Rights Restoration Act, even if Congress passed it.
VA's testimony stated that if the Veterans Second Amendment Restoration Act is signed into law, and this is even more troubling, the VA could not comply because the VA states the Department of Justice, an executive branch agency, affirmed VA's interpretation of the Brady Act. So, is it the VA's position that the VA will not comply with an act of Congress based on another agency's interpretation of the law?
So the VA has always works to comply with all laws. We complied with the Brady Handgun Act when it was in fact the law.
So again, is the VA's position, because based on the statement they could not comply with the Restoration Act, the Veterans Second Amendment Restoration Act, is it your position that you will not comply with an act of law passed by Congress?
Yes, sir. I guess based off of what you have in testimony, yes, sir.
That you would not comply?
Yes, sir.
Well, I'm glad everybody hears that on the record, that the VA is going to refuse to comply with, regardless of what we actually pass here, including questions that Representative Self was just asking in view of the Chevron Act being passed. Mr. Chair, I have just a couple more questions, but I think that Mr. Friel has incriminated himself and the VA that they're going to have complete disregard for what we're going to do anyway. So
Mr. Friel, you're very well aware of how you just answered the congressman's question, correct?
Sir, as I said, it's in our testimony that we would have trouble complying with that law. As I said,
Mr. Friel, you're very well aware of how you answered the congressman's question.
yes, sir.
Not only did one VA bureaucrat say just that, but another bureaucrat said the exact same thing, and they put it in writing. Just watch this.
VA opposes the Veterans Second Amendment Restoration Act because it would require the Secretary to notify the Attorney General that VA had erred by reporting incompetent beneficiaries to the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. VA understands the sponsors of this legislation seek to restore the ability for persons VA has deemed incompetent to lawfully possess firearms. However, VA already provides individuals an opportunity to petition for relief from that prohibition. VA did not err in reporting, and if passed into law, VA could not comply.
Not much logic floating around the VA, it seems, which is tragic. Even after Representative Luttrell gave him not one, but 2 opportunities to realize the huge mistake he made. Just remember, no one is above the law.
Are not above the law.
We don't believe that anybody should be above the law.
They were all beating the same drum, if you will. No one is above the law.
No one is above the law?
No one's above the law.
The fact is, no one is above the law.
That nobody's above the law.
No one. No one is above the law. No one is above the law.
Right. No one is above the law except bureaucrats who will happily disregard an act of Congress to disarm veterans who fought and served to protect our rights. Thankfully, Representative Rosendale and Representative Crane didn't let that slide. Let's listen in to this bureaucrat try to fumble around how his duty is not to the Constitution or to the American people, but instead to his boss and his boss's boss.
Mr. Friel, did you tell Congressman Rosendale earlier that you would not comply with laws passed by Congress that overrode the VA's interpretation of law?
So I'd like to clarify.
Please do.
So within the VA perspective, we have put in our testimony that the Secretary could not comply. I work within the VA. I work for the Secretary. So we would, as the instruction is provided to us, we would demonstrate and implement as we are directed to do so.
By who?
By the Secretary.
Do you see how that creates a problem, sir? Do you recognize that the position that you're taking in this room today takes the power away from the people in this country who send representatives to Washington, D.C. to become lawmakers?
I do.
So then why is that your position?
So
do you not care, sir, that this country was formed and founded by the people, for the people?
I do, and I have taken an oath to uphold the Constitution.
Well, then why would you take a position like that?
So as I said, I work for the Secretary, and we would follow the guidance.
Oh, so you work for the Secretary, so you would override what the people and the Constitution actually say. Is that what you're telling me, sir?
So I would be following the direction provided to me by my leadership.
If he told you to do stuff that was unconstitutional, you'd do it? That's what you're telling us. So where are your where is your loyalty, sir? Is it to the Constitution or is it to your boss?
My loyalty is to the Constitution. However,
Doesn't seem like it, Mr. Friel. Especially, and the problem is, sir, you seem like a nice guy. The problem is we're talking about veterans' rights and due process and their right to bear and keep arms, another constitutional premise. But you're willing to do what your boss tells you to do, even if it violates their rights.
and so we have conflicts of
You should
laws
do
also.
some soul searching, sir. You really should, on where your loyalties lie. And unfortunately, you're definitely on the wrong side of this one, constitutionally.
Now, this is outrageous that an unelected bureaucrat is going to act against the will of the people and their representatives. Let's listen to Representative Rosendale talk about how veteran disarmament discourages vets from seeking mental health care at the VA for this exact reason.
The National Academy of Sciences found that 35% of the veterans identify, and I quote, the potential of having their personal firearms taken away as an obstacle to use VA mental health services. So if the VA won't acknowledge, and you will sit here and not acknowledge this or try to change that belief, that only leads us to believe that the VA is either trying to reduce the delivery of mental health care, because we have evidence that shows that it does reduce the confidence that veterans have in going and seeking this care. And if you won't acknowledge that, and if you want to change that, then that leads us to believe that you're either trying to reduce the amount of health care that's being delivered by the VA, or you're making this an attempt to seize firearms from the veterans.
Next, we're going to hear from the National Defense Committee's Bob Kerrey on how what the VA is doing is not only unconstitutional, but they're not being entirely truthful about how veterans are given fiduciaries and ignoring any of their responsibility for it.
The fact of the matter is that the VA cannot be trusted in this issue. It will do whatever it is necessary, laws or not, to report veterans to the NICS database and to states as mental defectives. And what I want to discuss now is that fiduciary program. It is not that the fiduciary program, it's not that this is what the law was at the time. That law was it was a regulation. And that regulation was fundamentally not in compliance with due process or due process rights. The fiduciary program, before it even gets to the NICS database, before it even gets to the determination and the reporting to DOJ, is fundamentally not in compliance with that veteran's due process rights. As I detailed in my July 18th, 2023 testimony, the veteran's disability benefits have legal standing as personal property, only subject to control through a judicial due process, and that was Cushman v. Shinseki. But Goldberg v. Kelly found the due process clause requires an evidentiary hearing to deprive. And, quote, recipients are at the mercy of a vast bureaucracy without procedural protections, which could be turned into an arbitrary decision-making. Therefore, quote, individuals need to be protected from the bureaucracy. I would argue that Mr. Friel's commentary today makes that even more so. And now with Loper v. Raimondo setting aside Chevron deference, I think there's going to be a lot of people that are going to have a good case to say, why was I referred?
And of course, not only did the VA oppose the bill to restore veterans' gun rights, but the Biden VA also wants to use gun confiscation orders on veterans.
Restricting VA from using red flag laws puts the safety of our veterans as well as other, their family members at risk.
The VA opposes the Safeguarding Veterans Second Amendment Rights Act, as it would prevent VA officers and employees from participating in the execution of extreme risk protection order proceedings.
But we're not going to give up or stop fighting for veterans or the Second Amendment just because a couple of tyrannical bureaucrats said they would ignore our law. We'll force them to do the job one way or the other. These clips have shown you exactly the type of anti-gun bureaucrat that GOA and our allies deal with every single day here in Washington, D.C. And this just in, Representatives Luttrell, Rosendale, Self, and Crane have just sent a letter to the Secretary of Veteran Affairs ripping the VA bureaucrat to shreds over his testimony that the VA would not comply with the bills if they were to pass. Now the Secretary has a week to apologize and reverse their decision. Otherwise, the committee and the rest of Congress will rain hell down on the department. There are a bunch of ways that these members can make life miserable for these anti-rights bureaucrats if they want to continue ignoring the will of the people and Congress. I'll be sure to give you more updates on the progress of these two bills, so be sure to like below for future updates. We never would have been able to stop 20,000 veterans from being disarmed in 2024 if it weren't for activists like you taking action, so thank you. And thanks for watching. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date with GOA's latest fights for your rights.